Welcome to another movie plot. Enjoy the memories and watch out for spoilers. The film opens with a hitman waiting in a field for his target. It suddenly shows up and gets blown away by his blunderbuss. Joe works for a gangster living in the future and gets paid with silver ingots strapped to the back of his victims. By the year 2074 it's become impossible to get away with murder, so the criminals have resorted to sending their targets back in time for hitmen like Joe to dispose of. They call themselves loopers because one of these days Joe will be tasked with shooting his future self in what's known as closing one's loop. He'll know it's him as the bars will be gold and he'll get 30 years to enjoy his retirement, before being sent back for young Joe to dispose of as a way to cover their tracks. The year's 2044 and the world lives in poverty due to an economic collapse, except for the criminals, which is the reason for people like Joe choosing such a finite existence. His fellow looper Seth just wasted his last paycheck on a busted hoverbike and bums a lift to work with his friend. Seth's one of the 10% of Kansas City that's mutated telekinetic powers in recent years, though they can only float coins. They go to their boss's club where usually Joe spends his time with showgirl Susie, but tonight she's booked out. He joins fellow looper and TK Dale to hear that another coworker has just closed his loop and they're celebrating. The following morning the whole process repeats itself and they all begin to notice that loops are being closed at an increased rate lately, when even Dale gets his retirement bonus. One night Seth visits Joe at his apartment in a panic, saying that he failed to close his loop. His older self was singing a song his mother sung to him and he couldn't bring himself to do it. Apparently a new crime boss called the Rainmaker has taken over and is closing everyone's loops. Before Seth can reveal any more, the Gatmen show up looking for him as Joe reluctantly stashes him in his floor safe. The Gatmen work for the same boss as the loopers and suspect Joe is harboring Seth, so they take him back to the club. Kid Blue's the leader of the Gatmen, so named for their Magnum revolvers, and boast about the range and accuracy they've got over Joe's short-range blunderbuss, so the looper makes fun of the fact that Blue once shot himself in the foot. Taking offense, Blue stands up in front of a door threatening to shoot Joe in the face, when it nearly takes his head off as their boss walks in. Abe was sent here from the future to manage loopers and employs Kid Blue's dimwits to run the illegal business. He demands that Joe give up Seth or else he'll take half of the silver he's been saving up for his retirement, so Joe immediately rats him out. Meanwhile old Seth's still on the run and notices old scars appearing on his arm that give him an address. Suddenly his body parts begin to disappear one by one as if they were removed years ago. He frantically drives to the address but his foot vanishes and he crashes. As he crawls up to the doors he's nothing more than a torso and is put out of his misery. Kid Blue drags him inside where young Seth will be kept alive for the next 30 years. Spending the night with Susie, Joe tells her that when he retires he'll leave her half of his silver, but begins to regret his traitorous decision when seeing where Seth was dragged from. One day while waiting for his target, his older self appears in front of him unbagged, tied up and ready. He spins around and uses the gold to deflect the blunderbuss, then throws a bar in his fist at himself. When the kid finally comes around he finds a note telling him to leave town. Instead he returns to his apartment to try to get his gold but finds the Gatman in the middle of stealing it. He traps Kid Blue in his safe and tells him that he'll fix everything but gets shot in the ear through the floorboard. Another one walks in the door, so Joe goes out the window and uses the fire escape, but slips and KOs himself. In the timeline that old Joe comes from, Joe closes his loop and uses the gold to move to Shanghai. He begins to live the high life and manages to blow through all of his gold within 10 years. By 2054 he becomes a contract killer and soon after he begins balding. In 2067 his hair is completely gone and he falls in love with a woman that he marries. Until 2074 he lives a relatively quiet life, until one day 3 men kidnap Joe and burn down his house. They take him to the time machine to send him back for execution, but he slips his restraints and fights back. Joe then decides to jump into the time machine and knock out his younger self, but this time we see him steal his car and rob a store with young him's blunderbuss for first aid supplies. He then goes to young Joe's apartment and kills one of the Gatmen outside for his revolver, preferring the range. When young Joe falls from the fire escape after locking Kid Blue in his safe, older him kills his attacker, then ditches him in a nearby field. Old Joe goes to a library and writes down a bunch of numbers when letters begin to scar his arm. He goes to a nearby diner as they spelt Beatrix, the name of the waitress that Joe would visit after every kill. The two order identical meals and old Joe tells the story of the Rainmaker. He single-handedly took control of all of the major crime syndicates within 6 months and has begun a mass purge on the loopers. He says that the 3 men that kidnapped him accidentally killed his wife, so he came back for revenge. Old Dale gave him numbers that can locate the Rainmaker, who is only a child at this time, and all that's known about him is that he has a synthetic jaw and his mother died. Just then old Joe kicks young him in the balls, takes him hostage and shoots an entering Gatman. The entire fleet ambushes them, so after ripping off a piece of old Joe's map, young Joe decides to join them in trying to kill himself. The veteran escapes, so Kid Blue chases young Joe, but he gets away on a hover bike, though after a short distance ditches it. Back in town, the kid's punished for his failures with his gat being removed and a hammer to the hand. Young Joe follows the coordinates from the piece of map he took to a farmhouse owned by Sarah. She manages the farm by herself and Joe spends his time just watching her from the crops. The addict begins to go through withdrawals, and one night when Sarah's approached by a stranger from the dark, Joe jumps out thinking it's his older self, but it's just Jehovah's Witness. He collapses and is nurtured to health by Sarah and her child Sid. When Joe wakes in the morning, Sarah confronts him with a shotgun, telling him to leave. He shows her the numbers written on the paper and begins to explain why he must stay. When she shoots him in the chest with rock salt that old him suddenly remembers. She says the digits are Sid's birthday and the serial number of the hospital where he was born. Meaning the two other locations marked on the map are that of possible Rainmaker candidates born on the same date and place, as old Joe is shown going to the first of his targets and shooting him dead. But when he doesn't return to his own time, he realizes he has killed an innocent child. Sarah patches Joe up and warns him to stay away from Sid, but the kid waits until she's asleep and befriends the stranger. The highly intelligent 5-year-old shows off transmitters he's built so they can signal each other if needs be. The next day, Sarah gets in an argument with Sid about staying away from Joe when he begins to get all spooky. So she runs to her room and hides in a massive safe, appearing to do this on a regular basis. Later in the day, old Joe tracks down another one of the potential Rainmakers but realizes it's Susie's son and struggles to do it, while being caught on camera by Kid Blue. Inevitably, Gatman Jesse comes to the farm looking for Joe. He helps himself inside while Sarah distracts him from knowing anyone else is in the house. Sid wakes up and asks Joe if he's going to shoot the man, but Joe says no, so he leads him away. The two perch in a tunnel outside the house and talk about their mothers. Sarah gave Sid to be raised by her sister until she was killed when he was 2, while Joe's mother sold him. When Jesse leaves, the two exit the tunnel as the looper is finding it hard to believe this is the ultimate killer. That night, Sarah feels lonely and puts the transmitter to good use when calling Joe upstairs. They spend the night talking, where Joe learns that Sarah is a TK with more power than Dale and Seth ever had and would use it to pop blood vessels in other mutants' heads. She says that Sid was adopted by her sister as she wasn't ready yet, but has regretted it ever since. In the morning, Jesse's returned and is holding Sarah at gunpoint. He's one of the few Gat men that Joe actually likes, but says that Abe's going to kill him no matter what he says. Sid startles Jesse, but he doesn't fire, unlike some other rookies would. As Joe tries to save Sid from falling down the stairs, Sarah tackles him outside before he hits the ground. He goes into a rage as the whole room levitates and Jesse's blood begins to rain from his chest, then blows the living room out. Sid's abilities confirm to Joe that he's the one killing everyone, but Sarah says it's only when he loses control and that her sister died when he fell from a bookshelf, but that he will grow up to be a good person as long as she can raise him in a loving home. Joe finds Sid in the cane field and can't bring himself to do it, instead planning on doing it Sarah's way. Meanwhile, old Joe's just about to kill Susie's kid when he remembers who the Rainmaker is, but gets captured by Kid Blue lying in wait. Abe and everyone's gearing up to go to the farm when the kid returns with old Joe to everyone's surprise. He can't be happier and demands some respect when Joe takes his gun from him and shoots him in the leg. He then proceeds to take a gun from their armory and slaughter the entire raid team. Joe then walks through, shooting anyone who approaches, and kills the groups with explosives. As Abe barricades himself in his office, he attempts to play on Joe's emotion with the first time he ever fired a gun, when the door flies open and Kid Blue wakes up. The last remaining Gatman sees all the carnage left behind and finds Abe already dead, then goes alone to the farm. The two Joes confront each other near Sarah's house, where old Joe's taken a truck full of Abe's gold. Young refuses to take it and fires on Joe when Blue comes tearing around the corner on a hoverbike, knocking him over. The revolver definitely has a longer range, but the kid's accuracy sucks, as Joe kicks up a dust cloud with the blunderbuss, then blows the Gat boy away. Sarah and Sid attempt to drive away, but old Joe intercepts them and starts shooting at their truck, causing Sid to freak out and flip the truck. They attempt to run into the fields to escape, but old Joe is using one of the Gatman revolvers and hits Sid in the cheek. He goes into another telekinetic rage and blasts both his mother and Joe back, suspending them in the air. The shockwave sends young Joe's truck toppling over the moment he arrives, but before the kid rips them all to shreds, Sarah calms him by telling him that she loves him over and over. He calls her mom for the first time ever and the storm subsides. Recovering from the attack, old Joe picks his gun back up, but Sarah sends Sid into the field and stands between them. Knowing he'll lose the kid forever should he reach the cane field, old Joe's about to fire when young Joe begins to envision everything leading to the creation of the Rainmaker. Old Joe shoots Sarah through the heart, but Sid escapes onto a freight train to grow up without the love of his mother, just the drive to seek revenge on the loopers. So without the range on his blunderbuss to reach his older self, he shoots himself in the chest, killing him and old Joe in the process. Sid emerges from the cane having not run away, and Sarah lovingly embraces him, telling him that Joe simply had to go away. After patching him up, she tucks Sid into bed and goes back outside to find the gold bars surrounding the truck. She walks over to Joe's body lying in the field and mourns over him while stroking his hair. And the movie ends. So you made it. I appreciate your time. I couldn't have done it without you. Tell your mother I said thanks.